Hello everyone, welcome to our Egyptian Online Seminar group. First, from those, then if you have any questions, you can ask our speaker during the presentation or after the presentation. I have great pleasure of welcoming dear Professor Douglas Stephen and dear Professor Heba Abdel-Rahim. Douglas Stevens is one of the top accounting thought leaders in the world. He is a professor of accounting at Georgia State University. His research used the methodology of experimental economics to explain economic theory in managerial accounting, financial accounting, and auditing, and appears in leading academic journals, including the Accounting Review, Contemporary Accounting Research, Accounting Organization and Society, Experimental Economics, Journal of Management Accounting Research, Management Accounting Research, Auditing, a Journal of Practice and Theory, Behavioral Research in Accounting, and Journal of Business. Heba Abdurrahman is an associate professor of
Um,
accounting.
Heba Abdel-Rahim.
Abdel-Rahim, sorry,
Yes.
is a professor, associate professor of accounting and a termed chair of the accounting department at the University of Toledo. She holds a Ph.D. in accounting from Georgia State University, a master's degree in accounting from the University of Florida, and a Bachelor of Commerce from Asyut University in Egypt. Her research examines how managerial accounting systems and particular influence organization decision making and behavior. Dr. Heba was work has been published in top journals including Accounting Organization and Society, Contemporary Accounting Research, and Journal of Forensic Accounting Research. Now we will start our seminar with dear Professor Douglas Stephen and dear Professor Heba Abdurrahim.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mohammed. We really appreciate the opportunity to present at what has become a very established and very high quality online seminar for researchers in business, accounting, and economics. And I've presented here in 2021. I have been an active participant and enjoyed so many insights from this very useful format. So we feel really relaxed to just kind of share what's going on with our research and hopefully lead to more research in this area. We think that the vision for agency theory has not been realized, not even close. So while people have written off agency theory over and over again, even as recently as 2012 and 2018, agency theory continues to be the dominant economic theory of the firm in accounting and finance. So it continues to provide very useful insights regarding the usefulness of information and information asymmetry on the behavior of self-interested agents. Now, in a world of ESG, DEI, global warming, social justice warriors, we have got, I think, enough evidence to realize that people are motivated by much more than narrow self-interest. And if we continue to use a theory that assumes only self-interest, and we'll discuss what that means in just a minute, you're going to have a theory that's just not very useful. It's not going to be useful to describe behavior. It's not going to be useful to predict behavior. And it's not going to be very useful for policymakers who are now in this new environment and trying to determine what kind of accounting systems and accounting information is going to be required. And so this is a part of a new movement in accounting and finance. We both are realizing that agency theory is not very useful in the current environment. So I am seeing more and more papers, more and more experiments and theory using social norms and values, shared values. And it's a very exciting area. And we've had a number of experiments, Heba and I, and we have been working very hard on thinking deeply about the implications coming out of the participative budgeting literature in particular. And so we've got a number of projects still in the offing, but this is one that we've been working on for a long time. And for the first time, we've decided to put a couple of experiments together and come up with a general paper on the usefulness of agency theory to accounting. And what we attempt to do in this paper is develop a new agency framework. And there's really nothing surprising about being able to extend agency theory. Michael Jensen in finance has been kind of looking at this. He just passed away last year, and me and a co-author, we did a tribute to him in the Journal of Applied Corporate Finance, kind of talking about Jensen's attempts to extend agency theory. And he was really handicapped. He had, I would call, his hands were handcuffed because he had bought into the very narrow positive economic theory of the Chicago School. And so what I did 4 years ago when I presented is I talked about how the Chicago School had misinterpreted Adam Smith. And in 4 years, I've changed my mind. They not only misinterpreted Adam Smith, they completely mischaracterized the father of modern economic theory. So since then, I've joined the International Adam Smith Society. I've been attending their annual conferences and regional conferences. And recently, there have been a number of papers talking about the wealth of nations. We're coming up to the 250th anniversary. And there's just the new research just shows again that what the Chicago School did, while they ignored every other aspect of the German historical school of economics, they bought in 100% to their very distorted view of Adam Smith and the wealth of nations. So they distorted the wealth of nations, and they completely ignored the theory of moral sentiments, which was his first work. And so it has led to a very narrow and very minimalist economic theory. And we're beyond that. We're ready to move beyond that. So now my research talks about the implications of misinterpreting Adam Smith and why we are where we are. And I've got a third book working on with Cambridge University Press on all that the Chicago School got wrong about Adam Smith. So we stay out of those weeds. We kind of throw it into a paragraph at the end. We don't want to be distracting on this paper, but it's an exciting time. Anybody who's doing research in this area is going to see a lot more coming out on the influence of shared values and social norms on economic behavior. And it was the moral foundation that Adam Smith used for the wealth of nations. So it's time to move on. So we are going to start by introducing, I'm going to introduce our paper today, Increasing the Usefulness of Agency Theory to Accounting, from Self-Interest to Shared Values and Social Norms. So I'm going to introduce our study by talking about the background, the methodology, and the summary of the results. I'm going to present our new agency framework that we believe increases the usefulness of agency theory. And then I'm going to talk about some hypotheses that can be tested. These are just some of the hypotheses that can be tested from our framework. So I will present the first three, and then Heba will come on. She's the main act, and she will cover the experimental methodology, the experimental results, and then the conclusion and our implications for accounting researchers, practitioners, and policymakers. So it was Dempsey and Feltham's 1978 accounting review paper that really introduced agency theory to the accounting literature. And ever since then, it has been the dominant economic theory in accounting. It's also due to Michael Jensen's influence, the dominant economic theory in finance. So its usefulness is unparalleled because of its ability to address agency problems that arise due to information asymmetry and narrow self-interest. But right from the start, accounting researchers have called for relaxing the behavioral assumption of self-interest. So we cite three very influential papers. One was early on in 1985. Pratt and Zuckhauser called self-interest an aberrant case because agents have other representative preferences or values. So right there at the beginning, we acknowledged that there are other factors besides self-interest. And in fact, Dembski and Feltham in that seminal paper, if you go back and read it, they acknowledge that they have some extreme results that would be moderated with social norms. So they acknowledge right in their seminal paper that social norms would be one way of enriching the theory. Colford and Pennow, in their published chapter, called self-interest an extreme case because agents care about the extent of damage done to other individuals. And the theory is totally silent about any other regarding preferences. And so Colford and Pennow said, it just isn't descriptive. People would not betray their mother and grandmother and those they love for a penny. And that's the way the theory suggests. So people care about the damage done to other individuals and don't just maximize their own utility. And then I've always found this quote interesting. Kaplan and Atkinson, in their advanced management accounting text in 1998, it's the most detailed chapter on agency theory I've ever seen. So if anybody wants just a good practical review of agency theory that also shows some of the formal results, Kaplan and Atkinson in their advanced management accounting present a really nice chapter on that. But in that chapter, right at the beginning, they admit that many accounting professionals view agency theory as cynical and irrelevant because they believe most people are responsible and honest rather than self-interested. So if you go out today and you ask accounting professionals, so what have you applied from agency theory today? Or how has agency theory affected your decision making in your firm? How has it affected the way you budget or the way you form your controls? They have no idea what you're talking about. So this includes the big four. I've presented some of my research at Deloitte and at other firms. And I would say agency theory and the traditional theory of the firm is pretty irrelevant. So now is a good time to go back and to see if, just like these people acknowledged way back 1985 and 1992 and 1998, that the theory really, really could be enhanced to include other preferences and values. So we rely on Brown, Evans, and Mosier's review and JMAR. Of course, Don Mosier, Harry Evans have been instrumental in using participatory budgeting to test and extend agency theory. And so they include two promising avenues for future research in this area. First, they encourage experimental researchers to seek a general theory that is broad enough to explain anomalous results arising in participative budgeting experiments and other agency settings. So they reach out specifically to experimental researchers And experimental researchers have done a good job of showing that people do have these other regarding preferences, but we still lack a unified agency framework that can put all those results together. Number two, Brown, Evans, and Mosier encouraged theorists to incorporate the anomalous results arising in participative budgeting experiments in future models designed to extend traditional agency theory. So in my book, I talk about all the many agency models that have extended agency theory to include social norms. What's missing is a framework that also includes values and what kind of values people in agency settings may also incorporate. So we're moving in the right direction. We just don't have a unified theoretical framework. The great thing about Brown, Evans, and Mosier is they don't just make these recommendations. They also argue what kind of experiments could be the most useful to reap the full vision or potential of agency theory. And they argue that experimental studies with the greatest potential for extending agency theory include an unambiguous agency theory prediction and a conflicting prediction from an alternative behavioral theory. So you can see that this is the model that if you go back and you look at experimental studies, the ones that are the most useful are the ones that do use agency theory to come up with very stark and unambiguous predictions, and then show that those predictions do not hold, but then go further to explain why they don't hold. And so since 2001 Evans et al., and since the Brown's, Evans, and Mosier review, we've got a building number of studies that have done a really good job of giving us evidence of where the theory just does not hold and what potential behavioral theories might explain that anomalous behavior. So what do? We demonstrate how incorporating shared values and social norms increases the usefulness of agency theory to accounting using the seminal participative budgeting experiment in Evans et al. So if you're not aware with that study, it just won an award for from the AAA for seminal contributions to the accounting literature. So the reason why that study has continued to be influential is because it fully incorporated agency theory and the intuition from the traditional agency model, and then showed how it was not descriptive, and then gave us some interesting results to think about why that agency prediction did not hold. And so we incorporate shared values and social norms to address three practical realities. Number one, and this is similar to what Copeland and Penno argued in 1992 when they incorporated ethical behavior. We say detailed accounting control systems may not be cost justified when agents are motivated by shared values and social norms. So we may be paying too much for our accounting control systems. Number two, information control mechanisms driven by shared values and social norms continue to be used in place of formal control mechanisms driven by financial incentives and contracting. So we have an agency model, agency theory that doesn't describe this behavior. Then number three, since agents exhibit preferences based on shared values and social norms, accounting control systems will be more effective if they utilize but also reinforce these preferences. So if these preferences are effective and they're being used and they can reduce the cost of our accounting control systems, then we should be reinforcing those preferences. So personal values are commonly shared in that they are internalized from prior social experience. So that's our definition, and we're going to, like good theorists, we're going to be very, very clear on what we mean by personal values. There are a lot of different definitions, but this is one that's commonly used in practice. I am seeing more and more companies and more theorists talking about values, and you're going to see that that they've been used in economic theory in the past. So it's a good time to just go ahead and include that in our theory. Social norm, that construct has been around for a long time. And that's behavior that's activated by situational cues that are present in an agency setting. What we do in our experiment and in our theory is we use responsibility, which again is very, very hot right now in the current environment, as a proxy for shared values. And we continue to use honesty as a proxy for social norms and for, again, behavior that is inconsistent with agency theory. And that's consistent with the use of Evans et al. So number one, more motivation. Accounting professionals view responsibility and honesty as valid behavioral assumptions in agency settings. So why not go ahead and start with two constructs that are very, very popular and have been popular with professionals. Number two, economic theorists have identified internal responsibility and socially mediated controls as important extensions of agency theory. And not just agency theory, but the most formal aspect of agency theory, as we'll see. And then three, participative budgeting experiments based on Evans et al., like I've mentioned, have provided consistent evidence for honesty norms. But to date, that evidence has not led to a new agency framework. So as suggested by Brown et al., we develop a new agency framework with shared values and social norms, and then test the implications of that framework using two participative budgeting experiments with a clear agency prediction of 100% budgetary slack. So we continue to follow Brown et al.'s model. Consistent with the predictions of our agency framework, we find the following results. So in the first experiment, agents who score high in responsibility report more honestly in the baseline condition when there are no controls, and they are more sensitive to increases in typical accounting controls, transparency, and accountability. And we manipulate those by an information system and face-to-face budget reporting. And then in experiment 2, we find that high responsibility agents report less honestly when the principal signals distrust by imposing the information system on the agent. So we document that agents who value responsibility also value trust. So this same crowding out behavior does not occur in low responsibility agents. So we document a new type of crowding out behavior for informal controls and show that it's due to signaling distrust to highly responsible agents who view themselves as trustworthy and therefore value trust. So we conclude that our new agency framework increases the usefulness of agency theory to accounting researchers, practitioners, and policymakers. And Heba will talk more about this in the conclusion. In essence, we believe that our agency framework yields important new insights regarding common agency settings and therefore increases the descriptive and prescriptive power of agency theory. We also argue that our agency framework yields important new insights regarding accounting controls aimed at addressing sustainability in environment, social, and governance. And also that our agency framework yields important new insights regarding efforts to internalize sustainability values and accurately report sustainability performance related to ESG. So amazingly, here we are in 2025, and there is absolutely no moral framework to explain ESG or ways to increase its effectiveness. So we don't have a theory for ESG. So agency models are participative budgeting, and we rely on Antle and Eppen and Antle and Fellingham. And they assume narrow self-interest. So just to show you the stark predictions of agency theory, their models predict that reporting inducing any honesty from the agent requires a hurdle contract that rejects all cost budgets above a given hurdle cost, but pays the hurdle cost. So this is a very inefficient and costly solution because you are required to reject otherwise profitable projects. And you're also required to put up with very high levels of budgetary slack in the budgets that you accept. So there is rationing and budgetary slack. Both costs are very expensive in the hurdle contract solution. So there's experimental evidence in Evans et al. And Rankin et al., of course, that supports the hurdle contract solution and that it does induce higher reporting honesty than trust contracts designed like a dictator game. However, there continues to be these unexplained or anomalous results. Evans et al. Find that subordinates exhibit honesty preferences under the trust contract, so they never get to zero honesty, and also that the amount of honesty in the budget increases as the fairness of the surplus increases. So right in their seminal study, you have a second social norm that comes into play, and you have a fairness norm that comes in and actually increases the agent's preference for honesty. Now, Evans et al. Don't attempt to model that. They don't make a big deal about that, but that behavior has not been explained. So Douthit and Stevens came along and they provided evidence that social norms can be a major offsetting or complementary social norm to honesty. And so they helped explain the results in Evans et al. As well as other results in Young, Rankin, Young, and Rankin, Young, and
Rankin, Schwartz, and Young.
Rankin, Schwartz, and Young. Yeah, don't let me leave out Stephen Schwartz.
2008. Yeah.
Yes. So Douthit and Stevens did a good job of, well, I shouldn't say, they attempted to go back and explain Evans et al. And a lot of other anomalous results. So they looked at 3 social norms: honesty, fairness, and reciprocity. And here they started to use Biscieri et al.'s model of a social norm to show that these environmental cues could activate an honesty norm, but also activate other social norms in a budgeting setting, like fairness and like reciprocity. So ever since Douthit and Stevens, there's been an increased use of social norm theory, and especially Biscieri et al. And we will use her model of a social norm, as you'll see. So let's get to the framework. So to explain these anomalous results, experimental researchers have again relied on Biscieri's model of social norm activation. Now, I've discussed Biscieri's model in my book, Social Norms and the Theory of the Firm, so I won't go into it in a lot of detail, but just to emphasize that she just models a general norm, and that social norm can be anything. And so it's a very general model. What we do in this paper is we focus on an honesty norm. And in particular, we also argue that internalized responsibility is a value that people have and that affects their social norm behavior. And we quote Kenneth Arrow in motivating our use of internalized responsibility. And I'm surprised I didn't put it in the slides. So I'm going to read his. No, I won't. I don't have time. So his argument is that principal agent theory could be the best vehicle to show the effect of internalized responsibility and social-based controls. So he basically, in his seminal paper, and of course he won a Nobel Prize in economic science, argued for principal agent theorists to incorporate internalized responsibility. And theorists have not done it. And we've looked at Biscieri's model, and we think it's the perfect setting to go back and realize the vision and the potential that Kenneth Arrow saw in agency theory and even principal agent models themselves. So let me explain this really quickly. So this basically follows Biscieri, but replaces a general social norm with an honesty norm, uses a specific financial reporting setting, which can be budgeting or any kind of financial report, and then emphasizes what internalized responsibility does in this model. And what we find is internalized responsibility makes the agent more sensitive to social norms and social norm expectations, and also at the margin can turn a social norm into a moral norm. So our model also bridges traditional economic theory with social psychology and with moral philosophy, all in one model. So we think it's very general and it's very usable. So we start and we say, let H be a behavioral rule for honesty in financial reporting settings of type S, where honest reporting is in the financial interest of the principal, but not the agent. So there's the traditional agency problem. We say that H is a social norm in a population of agents P if there exists a sufficiently large subset of conditional followers such that for each agent I, a member of those conditional followers, first of all, the contingency condition, I knows that a behavioral rule for honesty H exists and applies to financial reporting settings of type S. Further, I possesses some level of internalized responsibility R that affects the intensity of the perceived obligation to conform to H. And we give R a continuum going from 0 to infinity. Some modelers stop at 1, and we could have modeled it from 0 to 1, but it doesn't matter. So R can be 0, like in the traditional agency sense, or it can be infinity. So we're going to model Mother Teresa here, okay? But clearly we are modeling individual behavior, not just general population behavior. So then we present the necessary and sufficient conditions for an honesty norm H to be activated in a financial reporting setting of type S. So here are the necessary and sufficient conditions. So the conditional preference says that I prefers to conform to the honesty norm in financial reporting settings of type S on the condition that A, there are empirical expectations present. We have no suckers in our model. No one's going to follow an honesty norm if nobody else follows a norm, and nobody would expect anybody to follow an honesty norm in this setting. Okay, we have rational, reasonable agents. So first, the agent believes that a sufficiently large subset of P conforms to H in financial reporting settings of type S, and then either B, normative expectations alone, or B prime, normative expectations with sanctions. Okay, that can then increase the intensity or the power of the normative expectations. So without the sanctions, the agent just believes that a sufficiently large subset of the population expects them to conform to the honesty norm in financial reporting settings of type S. And just knowing that there is some group, some population, some known, maybe it's just accounting professionals, maybe it's just your family, maybe it's your mother, but you know that there's some group, some population that would expect you to conform. And so you have just the normative expectations. But of course, for some people, that's not enough. There has to also be some sanctions. So some will require that a sufficiently large subset of the population expects the agent to conform to the honesty norm, prefers the agent to conform, and may or has the potential to sanction that agent for nonconformance. Now, in the past, people have used this model to look at financial sanctions. We're going to use a more powerful test of our model. We're going to only include social sanctions when we test the implications of our model. So an honesty norm H is followed by population P if there exists a sufficiently large subset of conditional followers such that for each individual agent, conditions A and then either B or B prime are met, and as a result, I prefers, or the agent prefers to conform to the honesty norm in the financial reporting setting. Okay, now here's where we increase the power of the model. We conclude, or we add to the model, that as internalized responsibility approaches zero, that the agent must be motivated to conform to the norm, the honesty norm, by the threat of sanctions. So again, we are looking at not just the population, we're looking at we're looking at individual agents. Now, look what happens as R, or internalized responsibility, increases and approaches infinity. Now, the perceived obligation to conform to the honesty norm approaches the intensity of a moral norm. And we also have something else. As R approaches infinity, the agent views him or herself increasingly as trustworthy. And so they value trust as well as the honesty norm. So this is something that we considered when we saw the results of experiment 2. We thought we'd dive into it in more detail, and this helped us form the model to help explain the results of our experiment. So, consistent with Biscieri's model, then we allow for the possibility that the honesty norm is a social norm, even if it's not currently being followed by the population. The difference is, in Biscieri's model, it could be because there's a lack of empirical or normative expectations. In our model, however, we also include the possibility that, just like traditional agency theory, that the agent possesses zero internalized responsibility, or the majority of those conditional followers have zero internalized responsibility. So we have a special case. The traditional agency result is a special case of our more general agency framework. Okay, so that's it. So what are the constructs that we're focusing on? So to increase the generalizability of our framework, we focus on definitions of our theoretical constructs that are widely accepted. And so these are the three. Responsibility is a person's internal sense of personal culpability for behavior inconsistent with the social norm. We didn't invent that definition. It happens to fit our model really, really well, but it's from Bovens back in 1998 in his seminal work on responsibility. And that definition views responsibility as an internalized value that determines the agent's sensitivity to a social norm. And in our case, it's sensitivity, of course, to the honesty norm. Our transparency construct is based on Jacob Saul and our paper in AOS. It's the public revelation of one's actions or the reduction of private information regarding one's actions. And then accountability, again, we use Jacob Saul's work as well as Mulligan and Bovens. And that's the obligation to explain and justify one's actions to some authority. So again, these are very specific definitions. They fit our model well, and as you'll see, they fit our experimental tests also very well. So here are the hypotheses we're going to test, and then I'm going to turn it over to Heba. So it predicts main and interactive effects of our internal responsibility construct. So our main effect prediction is that internalized responsibility increases the recognition of the honesty norm and the sensitivity of the agent to empirical and normative expectations. Our transparency and accountability effects, which are already in our paper in 2018, is that transparency and accountability also promote honesty through both the contingency and conditional preference pathways. And then what's completely new in this study is the interactive predictions. And we predict that internalized responsibility enhances the positive effect of both the transparency and accountability constructs on reporting honesty. And so hypothesis one, in a baseline condition with no controls, agents who possess high internalized responsibility will exhibit higher levels of reporting honesty relative to agents who possess low internalized responsibility. The second hypothesis, the positive effect of high transparency will be greater for agents who possess high internalized responsibility. And hypothesis three, that the positive effect of high accountability will be greater for agents who possess high internalized responsibility. And then finally, hypothesis four, our crowding out effect predicts that agents who possess high internalized responsibility will exhibit lower levels of reporting honesty when high transparency is imposed on them by the principal rather than by a random process. Okay, so let me stop sharing my screen.
Okay, and I will share my slides now.
There we go.
Perfect. Let's see. 1 second.
Now, I neglected to use any of my Arabic language skills in my presentation.
Okay.
which are 0. But Heba has those skills. So if you have any questions that you need a little more understanding, feel free to use your Arabic as well.
All right, so hi everyone again. I'm very happy to present this part of our research paper, and thanks Doug for explaining all we have done all the way to the experimental methodology. So now starting with the experiment here, what we are trying to do is test the usefulness of our new agency framework. So we are presenting new insights inside our framework, suggesting that there is a big role for internalized responsibility, and internalized responsibility can interact with some of the controls inside the company, and that agents with high internalized responsibility care about trust, and they may resent being distrusted. So for that purpose, we are also running 2 experiments to examine our agency framework and these hypotheses. To do that, we used Evans et al. 2001 trust contract. That's a paper that was published in the Accounting Review in 2001. And in that contract, we have a principal. You could view it as the owner of the firm, and then an agent, and you could view the agent as the subordinate or the manager of the firm. And in that setting, the agent requests some money from the principal, and the principal does not have the ability to reject the agent's request for funds. So this is called a trust contract because it depends on the honesty of the agent. The agent knows that they need that amount of money, so they should submit with the amount that they need. If they lie or be dishonest in these reports that they send to the principal, then they gain money, and we call this budgetary slack. So they build slack, and this slack benefits the agents, but not the principals. So this is the trust contract we are using in this experiment, and it's a very strong setting to test the effects of our new framework, including the internalized responsibility concept. And then the 2 controls that we are using in our setting, the first one is transparency, and the second one is accountability. So now what I'm going to do, I'm going to go over each one of these constructs, which we are using inside our experiment, and show you how we are manipulating or measuring these constructs. So starting first with internalized responsibility, this is an individual level construct, so we can only measure this construct in our participants. So to do that, we use the Jackson Personality Index, and this scale measures responsibility using 20 questions, true or false. And I'm presenting here some examples of the items that participants read and have to answer. Like, for example, I contribute to charity regularly. If I had a cold, it would not bother me to mix with other people. If I accidentally scratched a parked car, I would try to find the owner to pay for the repairs. So as you see, these items measure the internalized responsibilities that individuals have. And the assumption here is that, based on our models, that this could go from 0 responsibility to infinity. So they should vary from individual to individual. So when we measure these items for our participants, it's 20 questions. Scores range from 0 to 20, again, true or false. And when we do the analysis, we find that the median score is about 13. So in order to have meaningful analysis of our results, we classified our participants as low responsibility or high responsibility based on a median split. So if you fall below the median or equal to the median, If a participant falls below or equal to the median, we will label them as low responsibility agents. If they fall above median, we will label them as high responsibility agents. And this median split method is commonly used in experimental economics. So we're using what normally is done in prior research. Now, just to give you a quick background about the Jackson Personality Index revised scale for responsibility, prior research has linked this scale with conscientiousness and has, positively correlates with this personality trait and negatively correlates with psychopathy from the dark triad personality inventory. So you can view that, we can measure internalized responsibility in different ways, but we use the Jackson Personality Index measure because we are convinced that it is a very well proxy for internalized responsibility for agents, reflecting, their sensitivity to being more responsible for others and follows the definitions that was presented earlier for responsibility. So that's how we measure responsibility. Now let's go over the setting itself for our paper. And again, this follows Evans et al. 2001 in the accounting review. So it's a basic budget reporting setting. So when participants, come to our experimental study, they get seated, and then they assume the role of either supervisor or agent. And the agent, you can view it as the employee or the subordinate. So the assumption here is that the agent or the employee or the subordinate, they have more information about the company's operations because they are more closer to the operations. They view them, on more frequent basis. So they have more information, private information compared to the supervisor. So what happens is that they learn the actual cost of a coming up project, and the actual cost for us, we generated by the computer between, within a range from 4 to 6. And then once they learn the actual cost, they need to implement the project. So they submit a budget request to the supervisor. And then the supervisor receives the budget request. And again, this is a trust contract. So the supervisor would assume that they are, telling the truth, and they will send the money requested to the agents to complete the operations of that project. So this is based on experimental economics. So we pay for agents and supervisors based on their decisions. So for the agents, when they submit the budget request and then get the money, how their payoff is determined is that they get 1,000 lira, which is, a currency that we use inside our session that later on we convert to dollars and we pay them real money at the end of our study. So they get 1,000 as a fixed salary, plus they get to keep the money, the difference between the actual cost and the budget request. So for example, if they learn that the actual cost is 4, but they tell the supervisors that my cost is 5, and then the supervisor pays them 5, what happens is that 5 minus 4, so times 1,000, so they get an additional 1,000 just by not being honest. And the supervisor will not learn about this, budgetary slack, because it's, again, private information for the agents. So this is a measure of the budgetary slack, which they get to keep. And you see why they have the incentive to not being honest, because not being honest, overstating the budget, is going to earn them more money. On the other side, for the supervisor, we pay them $500. We call it an endowment. And then the project itself earns them 6.5. And then, we subtract from that the money that they send to the agents, the budget request times 1,000, and then they get to pay the fixed salary for the agent. That's the minus 1,000 at the end. So as you see here, there is a clear conflict of interest, because if they request higher budget, they, for the agents, they earn more, but for the supervisor, they earn less. So that's a clear agency setting in which there is a conflict of interest between the agent and the supervisor. And this is a very clean setting for us to test the effect of internalized responsibility, and then how controls like transparency and accountability interact with our internalized responsibility. So moving on, how we manipulated transparency in our setting. Transparency means that the supervisor will have a little bit more information about what is going on inside the operations of the company before they make before they pay the agents for the budget request. So what we have here is that we incorporate an information system that gives more information to the supervisor about the actual cost of the project. And of course, they will never have, 100% accurate information about the actual cost, because again, the agent is the closer to the operations. But the information system can tell them whether the cost is falling within, 4 to 4.25 range, or 4.30 to 4.50 range, etc. So they get a signal about which range the cost is falling inside, and this signal is 90% accurate. So this is our manipulation of transparency. When transparency is high, we have this information system. When transparency is low, this information system does not exist, and the supervisor has no information other than the cost could be anywhere between 4 and 6. So I hope you're following along. This is our manipulation of transparency. Now we manipulate accountability. When we look at accountability, it's more of, I'm accountable to the supervisor. So under low accountability, they just submit the budget request over a computer network. Under high accountability, we require the agents in our sessions to stand up and walk to the supervisor and hand in the budget request written in hand, with a piece of paper to the supervisor, handed by hand. So this is again a strong manipulation of accountability. And just, to give you a background, agents and supervisors in our setting do not know each other, do not know each other's names. They are randomly assigned to their roles. And the supervisor in all the cases does not have the ability to reject the budget request. So they can still, with all these controls in place, request, for example, the highest cost 6 and earn the most money. There are no penalty for them to do that, and the supervisor cannot reject their requests. So moving on to our second experiment, we want to test the effect of distrust. So in one condition, in experiment 2, whether the information system is present or not present, this is randomly assigned by the computer. So the computer each round will make a random draw, and depending on whether you can say a coin flip, either it's present or it's absent. And then when the supervisor, under the distrust conditions, the supervisors make this decision. So we ask the supervisors first, do you want to have an information system to learn more about the agent's private information? If they say yes, then there is information system. If they say no, then there is no information system. So again, when the supervisor is involved in learning more about the private information of the agent, this should communicate that there is a distrust going on between the supervisor and the agent. The supervisor is not trusting the agent very much, and that's why they want to learn more information about what is going on inside the operations. So to give you an overview of how our overall experimental design looks like, we have again 3 constructs here. In experiment 1, we have the transparency manipulation and its random assignment, and then we have the accountability manipulation, non-face-to-face versus face-to-face, and then we measure responsibility. In the second experiment, what we have is we have the manipulation of distrust by manipulating whether the transparency or the information system is present by random draw or by the supervisor's choice. Now, giving you background about our participants, we recruited 194 students from a business school at a private Western university in the USA. A majority of them had 1 year of full-time work experience, and 51 of them were female. And we compared age and gender demographics across all these 6 conditions and find that there are no statistical difference across conditions. So we conclude that, you know, there is appropriate random assignment of participants across conditions. So our analysis should not be affected by age or gender differences. And then, as I said earlier, we present the setting in lira, but then we convert lira into real money at the exchange rate of each 75 lira to $1, and we pay them at the end of the experimental session. And each session lasted about an hour and a half for participants, and the average pay per participant was around 13.5, plus they got to paid $7 for showing up for our experimental sessions. So this is a general overview of our experiments and how we conducted them, and how our session progressed is that we make participants interact with each other over 10 rounds. And for each round, we repair agents and supervisors. So each round, each agent is interacting with a new supervisor, so that there is no room for building reputation or for strategic behavior. Now let's go to the results. Our main construct of interest, what we are interested in testing here, is whether agents are being honest or not when they submit their budget report. So how we measure it is that we say, you know, reported cost, what you report, for example, you know, if you know that your actual cost is 4 and you report 5, so you are building slack, you're not being honest. So reported cost minus actual cost divided by the maximum reportable cost, which is 6, minus the actual cost. So this is the magnitude of dishonesty that you have in the reporting. So 1 minus that, so if you have 0, you know, your reported cost is always equal to the actual cost, you're always honest, then your honesty will be 100%. And then it goes down as you increase your, you know, I'm keep saying your, but you know, for agents. So as you keep increasing your reported cost and overstate your cost, your honesty score will go down. That's how we measure reporting honesty. Now let's go over the results here. We have a baseline condition, if you remember. So let me go, let's see here. Sorry, 1 second. So in this condition, this is our baseline condition, low transparency, low accountability. So it's the basic baseline condition in which the agents receive the cost and submit their budget request to the supervisor under no controls. So what we see here is that we compare low responsibility agents versus high responsibility agents based on the scales that we used. And, you know, this is the first support for our agency model and our first hypothesis that there is a significant difference in the behavior of high responsibility agents versus low responsibility agents. And this is over time, over the 10 rounds of our session, high responsibility agents keep reporting higher than low responsibility agents in the baseline condition, and this is significant. So each one is supported. Now moving on to the second part that we test, we compare the effect of, you know, low transparency versus high transparency and low accountability versus high accountability. So we are kind of examining the effects of our controls that we incorporated inside our setting. And when there is high transparency, there is an information system that provides more information to the supervisors Again, no penalty, no ability to reject, but it has a positive effect on agents' behavior, on being honest. And the same for accountability. When they submit over the computer versus walking and face-to-face submitting the budget request by hand to the supervisor, what we find is that you see here that the line is going up and the slope of the curve is steeper. So accountability also has a positive effect. And the highest level of honesty, we see it here in the condition with high accountability and high transparency. And over time, the same pattern of behavior is observed with highest level of honesty under high accountability and high transparency, approaching 70% level of honesty. Now, to go and test our two other hypotheses, 2 and 3, about the interactive effect of internalized responsibility and transparency, and then internalized responsibility and accountability, which these tests are examining how do high responsibility agents react to these soft controls, which increase the expectations of being honest, increasing the normative expectations for honesty. So we see here, running this regression model, that we have significant two-way interaction between responsibility and transparency, and responsibility and accountability. And of course, transparency and accountability themselves have, a magnifying effect on honesty. So what we conclude is that as agents are more responsible, they are more responsive to these soft controls inside the company. And then we, run additional analysis comparing high responsibility versus low responsibility agents. I'm not tabulating this result here, but what we find is that the interaction between transparency and accountability, which is, being more sensitive to these controls inside the company, is only significant for high responsibility agents, but not for low responsibility agents. So again, this provides support that internalized responsibility interacts with the controls inside the firm in improving the honesty levels for agents. Now let's move on to our second experiment. Now we want to test how high responsibility agents react to distrust. So if you remember, we manipulated that by either random draw. The computer determines whether there is an information system or not, or the supervisor tells the agent, I'm going to have the information system. I need to learn more about your cost before you submit your budget request. So what we find here is that, we are comparing here agents with low responsibility versus agents with high responsibility, and looking at the interaction between having the information system and the supervisor's choice. It is significant in both conditions, but the significance level is higher here. So we follow up with more more analysis. So as you see here in the figure, and this gives you better view of what is going on. So the red line is for low responsibility agents, and the green line is for high responsibility agents. So under random assignment, and there is information system, but it was randomly assigned. This is the low responsibility agents. This is the high responsibility agents. They react very positively when there is no distrust going on. It's just an information system, more transparency in the firm. But when they learn that the supervisor made the decision to have the information system, what happens is you see how steep this line is. So their honesty drops significantly when the supervisor makes this decision, while for the low responsibility agents, it's kind of, declining, but not as much. So this is showing that high responsibility agents are also sensitive to distrust signals and cues in the setting. And this shows you also over time how high responsibility agents react to, the distrust signal. So, you see here, this is high responsibility agents under random assignment. their honesty level over time. And let's see here, this is high responsibility agents. You see this line, the difference in the lines, the drop in honesty when the exact same setting, but instead of it's a computer determined, it's supervisor determined, how they react to this distrust signals. They just drop their honesty because they value being trustworthy and they do not appreciate the distrust signals that they receive. So this provides support for our last hypothesis, the crowding out effect. Agents who possess high internalized responsibility will exhibit lower levels of honesty when high transparency is imposed on them by the principal rather than by a random process. So this concludes the results of our experiments. Now, let's give you like an overview conclusion of our paper. So in this paper, we are advancing agency theory by presenting a new agency framework, which, Doug, thank you so much for, giving all the details and background related to the agency framework. In this framework, we are incorporating shared values, proxied for in our setting as internalized responsibility, and social norms, proxied for as honesty norms. And in that way, we are extending the narrow self-interest view of the traditional agency models. And, in doing so, and as we present in our paper, we are supporting the professional's intuition that, just assuming that agents are self-interested and they need to be penalized and have all the controls like the hurdle contract is not really what is going on in practice. In practice, if you look at the professional views, it aligns with their beliefs that people generally have some sense of responsibility and value social norms like honesty, fairness, reciprocity, etc. So just having a very narrow self-interested view of agents is not how it is in the professional world, but as the academic side, we still stick with the self-interested agency model. So this is the whole purpose of this paper, to expand it beyond the self-interest and present this new agency framework. And then, of course, our additional experimental validation of our agency framework is presenting some evidence that high responsibility agents report more honestly and respond more positively to soft controls inside the firm, like transparency and accountability, even without any penalties or punishment or any source of financial controls. And at the same time, we show that they also value trust and they negatively react to distrust. And when they feel that these controls are being imposed on them as a form of distrust by the superior. So to conclude, our paper has implications for academics and researchers, for practitioners, and also for policymakers, and it opens the door for more and more research in this area, in agency theory that goes beyond self-interest by incorporating other social norms, other shared values. Here we are looking at honesty and responsibility. So from a researcher's perspective, we are offering a stronger descriptive and prescriptive model of agency theory that incorporates social norms, moral norms, and shared values. And for practitioners, we support the role of informal controls, fostering honesty and the value of responsibility, and promoting these informal controls, increasing transparency and accountability in a soft way that does not signal distrust to agents. And then from a policymaker's perspective, there is now a huge shift or focus on ESG and sustainability reporting. And of course, there is big room for dishonesty in reporting these reports. And there's, strong incentive for managers inside companies to report that they are sustainable, they are following ESG standards, while maybe they are window dressing or not as honest in these reports. So there is some implications for policymakers, providing them theoretical grounding for sustainability reporting, anti-greenwashing, and ESG values in the firm. And overall, we are trying to revive the moral foundation of agency theories that at some time it was trying, but then it got discouraged with the more focus on the self-interested view of agency theory. So Doug, I will leave you to give the concluding remark on this last point.
Great job, Heba. Thank you so much. Heba, I wish I had you at all my presentations. You did the results so well and so detailed. So before we open it up to questions, I've got a paper that argues that Adam Smith's moral theory can explain the rise and fall of ESG. So I basically take shared values and social norms as an explanatory way of explaining, first of all, why we got so into ESG and we needed to, and then why it has resulted in such a severe backlash in America. So I'm presenting that at the AAA, and again, any comments that you have, first of all, on this paper, I see lots of potential for digging into shared values. Now, we've been looking at social norms for a long time, but I am seeing more and more papers and more businesses saying that no, it's the values that are very prominent. And in this economy, people are behaving and taking positions based on their values that are very contrary to their economic interests. And it's very interesting that we think we have a model that can explain that, because we explain how if you value trust and then you are put in a situation where your controls and your firm treat you as if you are not trustworthy, that it will push you to actually act less trustworthy. And so there are lots of examples where you had firms who thought they were doing their products and their company a favor by promoting certain values, but it ended up doing the opposite. It ended up destroying their product or destroying their company, and it's because they didn't appreciate the importance of shared values. And so I think there's a whole lot of new area in this using this model. So what questions can we answer?
Thank you very much, dear Professor Douglas, and thank you very much, dear Professor Heba. Thank you very much. Now, if anyone have any questions, you can open your mic and ask your questions. Amin?
Yeah, thank you. Great presentation. You know, the matching principle and conservatism are a form of control system in some ways. Would you go as far as saying maybe we don't need that as much? And yeah, I'll stop there.
So you're talking about matching revenues with expenses?
Right. Or even matching expenses over the life of the useful asset, like thou shall amortize over 5 years instead of 8 years, or conservatism. Those are all in some ways forms of control systems by the external auditors, by the general.
I get what you're saying. I mean, yes, absolutely. So based on distrust and self-interest, we've developed this accounting system that requires very coarse information that focuses more on objectivity and not giving people flexibility. So Shyam Sundar, I don't know if you remember him, back former president of the AAA, said we've got to loosen up our accounting standards and allow people to use their social norms and use their behavioral expectations in their financial reporting. And we've never followed up on that. And Amin, I think that's what you're saying, right? That it could really affect the kind of public policy and accounting policy that we incorporate. Absolutely. Good point.
At the margin, like for example, the IFRS that the Europeans adopt, in some ways they allow more flexibility, but the end result is they're using the same level of conservatism. So even without a control system of conservatism, the results may not, this was a comment made last week's seminar by Penman.
Yes.
So that might be an interesting thing, that even without a control of conservatism, companies, now I'm not sure if the companies are reporting it or the external auditors are imposing on them that thou shalt report conservatively. But nevertheless, the difference between IFRS and US GAAP, the end result may not be that different. I'm just focusing back on accounting as a control system, because we are all constrained to follow matching principle to some extent and conservatism to some extent.
Yeah, I think what Steve was mentioning last week is that we have got to relax some of that extra conservatism if we're going to have any hope of conveying intangible assets and allow these social and moral values that are driving the value of corporations today. I think Sven has a question.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes. Hey, good to see you.
Hi, Doug and Heba. Thank you very much for your presentation in the paper. I have a question, or maybe more of a comment, that goes back to the basic theoretical premise that you're starting from, which I guess in my reading at least is that, well, agency theory needs to be complemented with, well, social norm theory, or whatever you call it, in order to provide a more realistic view of human behavior, right? There are some interesting debates, especially in sociology, that kind of turns that argument on its head and says that agency theory itself is not normatively neutral. It is highly normative, especially when it's being put into practice, as we saw being the case very much in the lead up to the financial crisis, and well, longer than that, perhaps throughout the 80s and 90s, when the whole hype around shareholder value was prominent. And that was very much underpinned by the teachings of people like Michael Jensen and others, which meant that agency theory, as sociologists would have it, became performative, or if you like, started to have real effects on the people who were supposed to be controlled by the prescriptions that agency theory provided. And I'm wondering if that's probably, I mean, that's something that goes way beyond your paper here, obviously, and can probably not be incorporated. But I think you touched a little bit on that towards the very end, when you wrap things up and talk how this can be taken further. Any reflections on that?
I will let Heba answer that because I'm talking too much, but I will just say that I'm sensing in your comments the very good work that's going on at Oxford on the purpose of the firm and expanding the traditional theory of the firm to incorporate obligations and responsibilities to people and planet. So this is Colin Meyer and Robert, there are lots of good research going on in Europe and in at Oxford in particular on just completely turning the theory of the firm around. And but they still use many of the same agency constructs. So Heba, what do you think?
So I mean, this is a very good point that you are making. So it's either abandoning the agency theory because it is not as descriptive. It's arguing that, agents are self-interested, motivated by their self-interest, and they have to be controlled. But what we are presenting here is that instead of abandoning the theory and going for other theories, is that we can update the agency theory because to some extent it is descriptive. And what we are saying is that at R equals 0, when responsibilities equals 0, it is the current agency theory. But what we're arguing is that R is not always equal to 0. R ranges from 0 to infinity. And at infinity, we are arguing that, a social norm could be a moral norm. So in a way, and I have read some papers that are highly critical of the agency theory and say it's not descriptive by any means, and maybe we should go for a stakeholder theory or other theories. But agency theory is fundamental and is important. But what we're arguing is that we need to revise the framework to incorporate shared values and social norms to increase its descriptiveness and usefulness for research. So this is my perspective on your question. I hope it's helpful.
Yeah, it does. I'm aware, I'm familiar with Colin Meyer's work, but there's also older debate that sort of this debate I think started but also I think this debate partly started in the wake of the financial crisis back in 2007, 2008, when the consequences of the excessive push for shareholder value maximization became obvious. This debate has been going on for some time, I think.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Are other questions? If anyone have any questions, you can open your mic and ask your question.
And if you want to ask, I mean, I have some advantage here knowing Arabic. If you want to ask it in Arabic, I can translate and then answer it for you.
Someone sent me a suggest or questions. He wondered if you test multiple period design with repeated supervisor agent pairs, including setting where principals can reject the budget. It will be useful.
Is it in the chat?
No, he sent it.
All right.
So we do not incorporate the rejection power of the supervisor in this study. So that's something that could be looked at. Power dynamics, you could incorporate lots of the traditional experimental manipulations, looking at pay scheme and yeah, there are lots of the shared values is just a whole wide open area though.
Sufyan, you have a questions?
Hello.
Yeah.
Thank you for your presentation. Thank you, Muhammad, for invitation and for this seminar. I have one question about the new insight about agents theory as this perspective oriented for ESG disclosure or to moral of applied ESG. My second question about the methodology used for this paper, I think it's experimental methodology. If you mobilize a theory, it's a positive or deductive approach or inductive approach. Thank you.
Thank you. So that's a very good point. So agency theory has always been a deductive theory. So we assume, we deduct these assumptions, and then we get results, and theorists have resisted going back and changing our assumptions. But how are we going to advance our knowledge? How do you advance theory if you're not willing to go back and question or challenge or revisit your original assumptions? So you're exactly right. We look around and Inductively, we know the theory doesn't describe. It's not useful anymore for ESG and all of these responsibilities that we've added to the firm. So we can start to go back and say, well, it's probably because we originally had assumptions that were not descriptive, and we've been hanging on to those deductive assumptions, and we haven't been willing to change those based on the evidence. So I appreciate that comment very, very much, because it makes very clear what we're doing here is we're going back and deductively we're saying those assumptions, yeah, they're always true. Just like Heba said, you can set R to 0 and the full power of the original agency theory is there, and it's been there, and it's been useful. We don't think we should throw away all those insights, but show what happens as R moves away from 0. And like many of these theories, as soon as you move R from 0, all these rich new results come forth that increase the descriptive and prescriptive usefulness of the model. So yeah, it's a very good time right now for theorists, experimentalists, and policyholders to start to enrich the theory of the firm.
Another point, someone write, no direct measurement of why high responsibility agent resent distrust. And he suggests conduct debriefs or interviews to explore agents' motivations. It will be useful, or?
So I can answer this question. So this is something just for being brief. I didn't present in the paper. We actually measured at the end of the experiment, post-experimental questionnaire, we measured whether they felt that they have been distrusted. And yeah, so our results, I'm not recalling the exact statistics, but our results show that compared to the random assignment, moving to the supervisor's choice, they felt that they have been distrusted. And then reacting to the distrust signals, they are more likely to react to the distrust signal if they have high responsibility versus low responsibility. So we have measures of distrust in the exit questionnaire, but I have not presented it as part of the paper. But this is an excellent question. Thank you.
Are there other questions? If anyone have any questions, you can open your mic and ask your questions. Someone asked about cross-cultural validity.
Yeah, that's
So,
another.
Yeah,
Heba, go ahead.
Yeah, so our sample is kind of homogeneous, coming from a private US school, but this is definitely, an avenue for future research, looking at cross-cultural differences and how, for example, replicating it in different, like participants from different backgrounds or coming from different geographical areas, it could affect their behavior. But still, I would say that our agency model should be descriptive regardless, right, Doug?
Yes, yes. But it gives culture a role. So internalized responsibility, that will differ across cultures.
Yeah.
Because it's a function of social interaction within the communities which the agent lives and works. And so you can encourage responsibility by the way that you recruit, by the way you train your workers. This is all good news across multiple cultures. But yeah, it is a cultural story that we're giving.
Yeah, thank you. Another questions. If you wanna have any questions, you can open your mic and ask your questions. Another point, someone suggest use agent fixed effect to control for unobserved heterogeneity. report effect and report effect size. وهي دي for transparency and accountability manipulations. You asked about this.
So the question is about the manipulation of our transparency and accountability.
Yeah.
So can you repeat the first part of the question?
He suggested to use agent fixed effective to control for unobserved heterogeneity.
I see. So in that case, what we capture in the exit questionnaire is their age, their gender, and their work experience. That's it. So if this is something like, yeah, I really appreciate that point. Yeah, of course we can add these as fixed effects in our regression model to just give assurance that our results are not affected by these fixed effects. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Sure.
Thank you very much, dear Professor Douglas Stephen, for your contribution and your effort. Thank you very much, dear Professor Heba Abdel-Rahim, for your contribution and your effort. Thank you, everyone, joining us today, and thank you very much for taking the time to present it to us today. It's been appreciated.
Thank you, Mohammed.
Thank you very much, Mohammed, and thank you for organizing this session.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes.